For today's video, we're going to take a look at the NHL Trade Deadline, all 21 trades that transpired, and see who were the winners and losers of the deadline. That and more coming up. So to start off, we're going to start with trades that occurred trade deadline eve, the night before. To start off, we saw Brendan Gooley and a 2019 first round pick, either St. Louis's pick or San Jose's pick, to the Anaheim Ducks for Brandon Montour. Brandon Montour is a very good defenseman, and he's a good top four defenseman. This is an upgrade definitely for the Buffalo Sabres on the back end. There were rumors they were considering trading Ristolainen out, but it seems like they've just added. So this is a good move for Buffalo. But for the Anaheim Ducks, I feel like this is a good trade as well. Brendan Gooley, he played in the American Hockey League All-Star game this year. He's been a very good player down there, and as well as getting a first-round pick. So this is for the Ducks, who are on the verge of rebuilding over the next couple of years, we would assume. This is a very good move to start that off, and they got pretty good pieces in return. I mean, Brendan Gooley, a former second-round pick, so you basically get a first and a second, looking at it in terms of that. So in terms of a winner and a loser, I would probably say, for now, Buffalo won this trade for getting the best player available, and that is Brandon Montour. But we'll see what happens with Brendan Gooley, and we've seen really good players come out of the draft late in the first round in years past. So we'll see what happens, but as of right now, I would definitely give the edge to the Buffalo Sabres for getting Brandon Montour. So now to a trade that occurred overnight, pre-deadline day. We see Gustav Nyquist of the Detroit Red Wings go to the San Jose Sharks in return for a 2019 second-round pick and a 2020 third-round pick. Now, there is a condition on the third-round pick. If San Jose does re-sign Gustav Nyquist at season's end or any time from now till July 1st, the Red Wings would get a second-round pick for 2020 as well instead of the third. So this is a good trade. Gustav Nyquist, obviously the San Jose Sharks have some really good depth on this hockey team with their forwards, and Gustav Nyquist is a great addition to that. He's a great veteran forward, great two-way player, scores goals, not at the clips that he used to, but a great overall player for the Sharks. In terms of who won this trade, again, this is another one, I think the best player available, and that's Gustav Nyquist, and that's a good trade for the Sharks. Again, this is a trade where the Red Wings, I'm not sure how much interest Nyquist had in returning to the Detroit Red Wings in the offseason, but if they weren't going to get anything for him anyway, this was a good trade. Possibly 2 second-round picks. As of right now, this trade's a win for the San Jose Sharks, and especially if they can win a cup with them. But who knows? These 2 second-round picks, possibly 2 second, third-round picks, this could possibly be a win for the Red Wings in the next 5 years, and that's what this trade is for. This is a trade for a win now for the San Jose Sharks and a win later, and looking at the future for the Detroit Red Wings. So now on to a minor trade. Patrick Seelhoff to the Anaheim Ducks in exchange for Brian Gibbons to the Ottawa Senators. Now this trade is not one of the big trades on the day, obviously, but this is a necessary trade for two teams that have struggled throughout most of the season. Anaheim gets a player in Patrick Seelhoff to help seal down the defense, probably a replacement for Michael Del Zotto, who was traded. And Brian Gibbons is an addition for Ottawa that they desperately need with some forward depth due to the fact that, well, now we're seeing with a bunch of trades they've made today and the past couple of days, they need some forwards. So this is a good addition for both teams. Winners and losers, in terms of players, I would probably say I like Patrick Seelhoff more than Brian Gibbons, but they're both. I mean, it's really nitpicking. These are two guys that are depth at best and minor league hockey players for the most part. So once the GMs started waking up and started drinking their coffee on trade deadline morning, we saw the first deadline day trade, and that was what a great trade. A 2022 fifth round pick from the Columbus Blue Jackets in exchange for Keith Kincaid of the New Jersey Devils. Now, at the time, because it was early in the morning, people were speculating that this may make room for the Blue Jackets to send out Korpisalo or Bobrovsky. Now, looking now, obviously that was not the case. This was indeed a shoring up goaltending. Now, this is a smart move because you never know what could happen in the playoffs. Anything can happen, and having another goaltender is definitely a lot of help. Now, the interesting thing is JF Berube has been playing in Cleveland with the Erie Monsters in the American Hockey League, and the speculation was he was probably a good number 3. Obviously, Jarmo Kekalainen, the GM of the Blue Jackets, wanted some extra depth there, so this is a good move. Again, in terms of a winner and loser, I would have to say the player there, and that's Keith Kincaid. That fifth round pick may become a superstar in a few years, but as of right now, that's a great trade for the Columbus Blue Jackets. Now, as the morning started to move along, we start seeing some impact moves, starting off with Kevin Hayes of the New York Rangers going over to the Winnipeg Jets in exchange for a 2019 first round pick, Brendan Lemieux, a 2019 fourth round pick, and the only reason that's there is it's a conditional pick. If the Winnipeg Jets win the Stanley Cup, the Rangers get that fourth round pick. Now, there's another pretty big this is one of the bigger trades of the day, and I like what Winnipeg did here. It reminds people a lot of what Winnipeg did last year, picking up Paul Stastny, and this is a good hockey player. He's going to help probably down the middle. They have some guys down the middle. They have Scheifele, they have Little, they have Roslovic, they have Kopp. So this is a trade that it just helps sure everything down the middle. Forbidding an injury. He could play on the wing as well, Kevin Hayes. So this is a good trade. And considering what Winnipeg gave up, this is not that bad for Winnipeg. Considering Brendan Lemieux, well, now the roster spot has been taken up by Kevin Hayes. A fourth round pick, you could take that with what you will. And the 2019 first round pick in a year where the draft class may be less than what people think it may. It's a weaker draft this year. So this is a good opportunity for Kevin Hayes to get a chance to play somewhere new. And there have already been rumors he wants to come back to the Rangers in the offseason, which I don't think Winnipeg would care much about if they get the Stanley Cup. So we'll see what happens, but in terms of winners and losers, I have to say Winnipeg won this trade. But as with a lot of these deals where we're not seeing many hockey trades, this is an asset trade. This may turn out to be a win for the Rangers. Brendan Lemieux is a very good hockey player. He hasn't been what the Jets were hoping for, and with the amount of depth that's in that lineup, he just has not been getting the opportunities. And being an RFA this summer, the Rangers will probably see what he has over the next couple of weeks and decide what they want to give him in terms of an extension, or if they even want to give him one and maybe just let him walk. So we'll see what happens, but I think this is a good trade for Winnipeg, but it's not so lopsided for the Rangers either. Give the Rangers credit for getting some value for Kevin Hayes. So just as we start getting into the afternoon of NHL Trade Deadline Day, Michael Chaput of the Montreal Canadiens gets sent to Arizona for Jordan Weal. And this trade is not much of a surprise in terms of the players involved. Jordan Wheel has been in Arizona for a little while. He was traded a few weeks back from the Philadelphia Flyers for a draft pick. Things have not worked out for Jordan Wheel since he's gone to the desert, and there's a great opportunity. It allows him to go somewhere new. Things did not start off well. And Michael Chaput has been talked about for months in Montreal. He's not gelled well with the system and the way things have gone with the Canadiens. So it's an exchange of, lower depth centers in the organizations, and this is more of a hockey trade. Now, I must say, in terms of who won this trade, this is a toss up, but I'm gonna go with Jordan Wheel because Michael Chaput has had issues with speed and his footwork, and that with the way the NHL is going and it's getting faster, this might come back and blow up on the Arizona Coyotes. So we've seen recently with some other trades, Dylan Strome, Anthony Duclair possibly, but we'll see what happens. In terms of a deal, this is a pretty good deal for both teams. These guys both needed a new scenery, and they got that in this trade. Carolina makes a move to bring in a forward, not subtract. They bring in Thomas Yurko from the Florida Panthers in exchange for Cliff Poo. This is an interesting trade because Yurko has struggled recently since he's been in Detroit. He's moved around a couple of times, been in Chicago for a stint, and in Florida. This is Carolina adding to their depth at forward, and we've seen recently they picked up Nino Niederreiter in that trade. Now they bring in Thomas Yurko. This is a good trade. Cliff Poo, when he was drafted, more was expected of him. Since then, his stock value has gone down pretty drastically, as all they could get for him was Thomas Yurko, who for the most part has been a minor league player over the last 2-3 years, or on the healthy scratch pad of an NHL roster. So we'll see what happens, but this is another trade. This is interesting because this might come back and bite the Carolina Hurricanes if Cliff Poo turns it around. He's still very young. Yurko's pretty significantly older, so this is an interesting trade, and we'll see what happens. In terms of a winner, I'm going to go actually with the younger guy. I'm going to go with Cliff Poo because his potential is higher than Thomas Yurko. His ceiling is higher, and this might be a really good trade for the Florida Panthers, but we'll see what happens over the next couple of years with this deal. All right, so the Florida Panthers weren't done yet, as they made a trade, Derek Brassard and a 2026 round pick, and that's a conditional pick on Derek Brassard re-signing with the Colorado Avalanche. In exchange, the Colorado Avalanche give up a third-round pick to Florida, and this is a good trade. Definitely more so for Colorado. They get a top six forward. He's been a top six forward in the past in Ottawa, and things didn't work out for him in Pittsburgh. He got moved a couple weeks back, in that trade with the Pittsburgh Penguins, sending him to Florida. And basically right off the bat, everybody assumed he would be flipped between then and the deadline, and he was flipped. I think the Florida Panthers were expecting more. Obviously, fans as well. We're hoping for more for Derek Brassard, maybe a first or a second round pick. But teams were pretty keen on not giving up those big draft picks, and they were moving a lot throughout the day. So it was kind of interesting. I think this is a win for Colorado. They get a top six forward that for a third round pick. And the issue with it, I think, is if he doesn't re-sign, I think that's a good value. Give up the third round pick. We'll see what happens. This is an interesting trade, but I have to give the win to the Colorado Avalanche. I just don't think a third round pick. It's one of those things, and the thing is too. What's interesting is the sixth round pick being in there. I wouldn't have been. I'm shocked that. I don't know what picks Florida has this year, or excuse me, Colorado has, but I would have been more pushing for maybe a second round pick on Derek Brassard re-signing instead of the third round pick, instead of giving up a sixth. But that, I guess there's some way in there that it didn't work out or something of the matter. So, but overall, definitely a win for the Colorado Avalanche in this deal. So one of the bigger defensemen on the trade market was dealt. Adam McQuaid of the New York Rangers, formerly, to the Columbus Blue Jackets for a 2019 fourth round pick, 2019 seventh round pick, and Julius Bergman. And Julius Bergman, a couple of days ago, was traded from the Ottawa Senators to Columbus in the Matt Duchene deal. So, or the Dzingel trade. I think it was the Duchene deal. I have to check on that. But this is another interesting trade for the fact that there's so many weird draft picks. And again, I think Columbus, I don't believe they have their first or second round pick, which is making these kind of wacky deals. For the Rangers, a fourth and a seventh, that's a good deal in terms of Adam McQuaid. I don't know how much more he really would have fetched. The only concern is he was one of the better defensemen available, and we did not see many defensemen available, which maybe you might have thought they could have gotten a little more for him. But Julius Bergman, I'm not sure the read-up on him, but maybe the Rangers expect him to be a guy that can come in and over the next 2 years and be a solid defenseman for the Rangers. Adam McQuaid, obviously the Blue Jackets continuing their push for a Stanley Cup this year with some big rental moves they made this year. And, there were some things coming out that they're, joking around saying they should just trade the rest of their draft picks. They have 2 draft picks in this draft and save that money and try and bring in some of these guys that they are renting out and sign them long term. But all joking aside, in terms of this deal, looking at the now, definitely Columbus won this trade. And it's a good deal for the Rangers as well, maybe in the long term, but as of right now, good trade for Columbus. So the Calgary Flames were expected to be big players at the trade deadline. And the fans were fairly disappointed at the fact that this was the only deal that transpired, but they did get a deal done. Oscar Fantenberg from the Los Angeles Kings in exchange for a 2020 fourth round pick. Now, Fantenberg has been in and out of the lineup for the Los Angeles Kings, and the Kings obviously aren't looking to him long term. So this is a trade where injuries occur, especially during the playoffs, and Calgary expects to be in the playoffs, being first in the Pacific Division this season at the moment. They're playing well. They wanted to shore up their defense, and giving up a fourth-round pick was a fairly measly price. But for Oscar Fantenberg, I think this is a fair value. And he is an RFA this summer, so we'll see what happens with Oscar Fantenberg. In terms of a winner of this deal, I would say Fantenberg for the fact that this is depth now for the Calgary Flames. But it's fairly close. You could argue either way that both of these teams won this trade. So throughout most of the afternoon, leading to deadline at 3 o'clock, there were rumors swirling that Mikael Granlund of the Minnesota Wild was available. And Nashville was interested. So we see a deal get done. Mikael Granlund to Nashville in exchange for Kevin Fiala. And this trade, I would definitely say, is a win for Nashville. I think Mikael Granlund is probably the better player. Kevin Fiala is a very good player as well. He's on a fairly low cap hit. I think he's making around $4.5 million over the next 6 years. He was just re-signed, and obviously there's some needs there. And Kevin Fiala may be a player that doesn't work out with Minnesota, but at least they have some cost certainty with him. He will be there as long as they need him to over the next 5-6 years. But I definitely have to say Mikael Granlund is the better player. I do like this. This is more of a hockey trade, which we didn't see a lot of today, and it makes it easier to grade who were the winners and losers. I would have to say Nashville won this trade as of right now. So as we start getting to 3 o'clock at the deadline, we see teams starting to drop out on Mark Stone and whatever was left of interest for Artemi Panarin. And Wayne Simmons gets moved to the Nashville Predators in exchange for Ryan Hartman, a 2020 fourth round pick. And that is a conditional fourth round pick if they win the Stanley, if they win a round, they have to win a round, which is interesting. That becomes a third round pick. Definitely a win for Nashville. David Poile doing it again, making a great trade at the deadline. Wayne Simmons may not be as high of a caliber player as he used to be, but he's a great hockey player, and this isn't a necessarily bad trade for Philadelphia either. Ryan Hartman, he fits the Philadelphia mold, the gritty, pest player, and the fourth round pick doesn't hurt either. I think Philadelphia for a while was asking for a first round pick, and teams were not giving it up. So they have to settle for the next best thing. Also, there were rumors that he was going to be traded to Winnipeg, and due to his contract, he had the right to reject the deal. He rejected the deal to Winnipeg and accepted to Nashville. So a little something to look at. And it's already been rumored that Philadelphia will get Wayne Simmons back in the offseason over the summer on July 1st. So that would be an extra win for the Philadelphia Flyers. But as of right now, Nashville getting Wayne Simmons, that's a good trade. That's a great guy to help. They've been looking for more grit in the lineup in Nashville, and that's exactly what they get. And speaking of what we just talked about with Kevin Fiala, now that Fiala's out of the lineup there, that allows Wayne Simmons to fill right in on the wing in Nashville in the top six possibly, to get in front of the net, be a tough guy in the boards. So this is a good trade for Nashville, and I would definitely give them the win. So Boston, for most of the day, was talked about being in on Mark Stone. Before Dzingel was traded, they were in on Dzingel. They were in on Wayne Simmons before he was dealt. And they settled with Marcus Johansson. Now, the big issue was with what happened last year. We believe Don Sweeney was a little nervous to trade a first-round pick this year after the value he gave up last year for Rick Nash. And I think this is a smart move for Boston. They probably would have preferred to get one of a guy like Kevin Hayes or Dzingel. But the issue, too, was a lot of teams that were selling were in the East, and that did not allow many destinations for Boston to look at. And teams were not willing to trade. You saw Ottawa did not want to trade with Boston. The Rangers didn't want to trade with Boston. All those guys got sent west, at least most of them. And they had to settle for Marcus Johansson, a second-round pick in this year's draft, 2019, and a 2020 fourth-round pick. So Ratio actually got more in this trade than what he was expecting. He said before the deadline he would like at least a second-round pick. So there may have been a little bit of an arms race there at the end for Johansson, throwing the fourth-round pick, and a pretty sweet deal for the New Jersey Devils. I do not believe Johansson was going to re-sign with the New Jersey Devils, and now this gives Marcus Johansson a new scenery in Boston. He may play in the top six, more likely once guys are healthy and back in the lineup for playoffs. He will probably be in the bottom six, but a good trade for Boston. I'm going to give the win to New Jersey here for the draft picks, though. That's a second and a fourth. That's a pretty good haul for Marcus Johansson, and the Devils continue the mini rebuild they're going through. So the Anaheim Ducks weren't done yet. Michael Del Zotto goes to the St. Louis Blues in exchange for a 2019 sixth-round pick. And they didn't get much value for Del Zotto. They just recently traded for him in a deal a few weeks ago. And now he's going on to St. Louis. St. Louis wanted some depth on defense. They didn't want to change up too much of the roster. They've been playing very well recently, especially with the success of Jordan Binnington in goal. And we'll see what happens. This is a good trade. But to be fair, I think Anaheim won this trade just for the fact that Del Zotto We kind of know what his ceiling is. A sixth-round pick is not very much, but I think I think the value there it's either losing him for nothing in free agency because he probably wasn't going to re-sign or get something for him at the deadline, and this is a fairly good trade. But you can make an argument for both teams on who won or lost this deal. So as the deadline was ending and pending calls were being placed in a little after 3 o'clock, one of the bigger moves that was made was Tanner Pearson of the Pittsburgh Penguins goes to Vancouver for Eric Goodbranson. Now, this was interesting because Eric Goodbranson was not really being talked about in terms of getting moved, and this seems to me that this has created the hole for Quinn Hughes to come up when he's ready. He's going to just pluck right into Eric Goodbranson's spot when his season in Michigan is over. And for Pittsburgh, there's a good trade as well because we don't know exactly how long Dumoulin and Letang are going to be out with injuries that they sustained in the Stadium Series game last Saturday. So this adds some depth, some veteran depth in Goodbranson, and he's a big guy, and that's something that the Penguins may need in the playoffs, barring a possible second-round series against Tampa or Boston or Washington with Wilson. So this is a good trade for both teams, but I'm going to go with Tanner Pearson here and Vancouver getting the win for the sole fact that Goodbranson has been struggling and his foot speed is pretty atrocious, and that me being fair. So I think Tanner Pearson is the better player out of these two. He's younger, better foot speed. He plays the better and the future of hockey in the direction it's going. He plays the mold a lot better than Goodbranson, but this isn't necessarily a loss for Pittsburgh. I would just give the edge to Vancouver in this one. So now, this is it. We've been waiting all season to see what the Ottawa Senators would do with their trio of big-time pending free agents. Dzingel, Duchesne were both moved to Columbus. That's why I'm wearing this jersey. Vegas. Vegas was the absolute winner of this year's NHL Trade Deadline for acquiring Mark Stone. Now, Mark Stone goes to the Vegas Golden Knights, signed an extension, not official until after the trade deadline. But they pick up Mark Stone in exchange for Eric Brandstrom, Oscar Lindberg, and a 2020 fourth-round pick from Dallas. But that was all from from Vegas to the Ottawa Senators. There's a lot to dissect here. So obviously, you already heard what I said about winner. Definitely Vegas Golden Knights. Now, this is kind of deja vu because I remember not too long ago last year in the 2018 NHL Trade Deadline, there were talks leading up from 2 to 3 o'clock that there were rumors that Erik Karlsson may go to the Vegas Golden Knights as well. Things fell through. Obviously, we saw him leave over the summer. And now they went back to Ottawa and said, hey, we want your big guy. And this year it worked. Second time's the charm for Vegas. Mark Stone. And that is a huge move. And especially the fact that they have re-signed him already. No questions about, is he going to re-sign? They gave up all that value. He didn't re-sign. Nope, he's in. And it's not official yet, but he will be re-signed. And now looking at what Ottawa got. So, obviously right now we're talking, Vegas is celebrating in the streets with getting Mark Stone, the big guy at this year's trade deadline, the big fish. But it did cost them. And the 2020 second round pick from Dallas, that's good. They pick up another draft pick. Oscar Lindberg, this is Ottawa trying to get back some forwards because the amount of guys, they lost Stone, Dzingel, and Duchesne, who were all in the top 6 of this forward group. So they needed to replace that, so you get Lindberg back. And Eric Brandstrom, who is definitely the biggest asset behind Mark Stone in this deal. Now, Brandstrom has been rumored to be possibly the next Erik Karlsson on the Ottawa Senators. He is playing overseas in Europe, and he looks amazing. This is a really good hockey player, and people are already salivating at the idea of Thomas Chabot and this kid Erik Brandstrom playing together on the top pair in Ottawa. But Ottawa fans, this is a very tough day because you've seen Eric Staal go last year, even going back to the Brassard deal for Zibanejad. Now Duchesne, Dzingel, and now Mark Stone, the guy you really thought might have re-signed, is not coming back. And Ottawa had to do what they had to do. Based off of this, I don't think they were really too close on a contract. You could go to upper management and ownership on that. But this is a very tough day for Ottawa Sens fans, and the hope is it's tough to see the light at the end of the tunnel for Ottawa, just where they were a few years back in the Eastern Conference Finals, going in overtime against the Pittsburgh Penguins in Game 7, and where they are now. It is a completely different landscape for the Ottawa Senators, all the guys they've lost, and even going back to Mark Mathot when he left. Oh, man. But anyway, definitely a tough day for Ottawa fans. But the big winners on the day, absolutely the Vegas Golden Knights. And now if they could bring that cup, second time's a charm, right? Last year they went to the Stanley Cup Finals, didn't get Erik Karlsson. This year you could get Mark Stone, possibly win a Stanley Cup. Year 2 might be the year for the Vegas Golden Knights. We'll have to see what happens. Thank you guys for watching. Hope you liked the video. If you really liked it, give it a thumbs up and subscribe. And let me know, who do you think were the winners and losers of this year's NHL Trade Deadline? And stay tuned for more from Goal Line Hockey. Thank you for watching. See you later.